Welcome to the ALTIS Podcast. I am your host, Stu McMillan. In this series, I'm sitting down with speakers and contributors to the upcoming ALTIS Speed Summit, which is brought to you by 3x4 Genetics and taking place in Chicago on June 6th, 7th, and 8th. A huge thank you, as always, to our sponsors, 3x4 Genetics, Stat Sports, 1080 Sprint, Team Builder, and Output Sports for making this event and this podcast possible. If you haven't yet secured your ticket, please head over to altis.world. Please come and join us. It's going to be great. Today's episode features Stacey Hardin. So this was really interesting to me because this is the first time I've done a few podcasts now. Like I've hosted a few, I think 8 or 9 of these and a few others previous to that. This is the first time I've actually interviewed somebody or had a conversation with somebody I didn't know. It's the first time I met her was today. So this was cool for me. It was, I'm getting to know her as you're getting to know her. And chances are you may even know her better than I do. So I found it was a really super interesting conversation. She has worked as the Senior Director of Player Health and Performance for Minnesota United in Major League Soccer. She currently serves as the Director of Medical and Performance for Bay FC in the National Women's Soccer League. We talked a lot about both of those things. Her work focuses on prevention, rehab, innovative performance strategies for elite athletes. But more than that, it's kind of more like Bay FC is a brand new thing. Like it's a startup. We talked about that a lot. It's a blank slate. So we talked a lot about what does that look like? What is it operating within this role that no one's ever done before in this new team that just started, which I think is pretty cool. I think it was a great conversation. So let's get to our conversation with Stacey Hardin. Thanks for being here. What do you do and why do you do it?
So I guess the first thing or the easiest way to answer that is by title. But as you know, like rarely does your title reflect what you do. So I guess by title, I'm the Director of Performance and Med for Bay FC, which is a professional women's soccer team in the United States. In practice, the day-to-day, kind of my job is three different buckets. So one is the long-term planning, strategic vision, and that strategy component of it, especially as a startup where we did not have anything established. We're talking about 1, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. We're talking about we have a first team now working on how is our franchise going to build out as a franchise? How are we going to build out in the youth development space? How are we going to build out in our physical infrastructure with a training facility coming and a stadium? So there's that long-term strategy component of it. And then more on the day-to-day is the leadership component. So leading our department and then being part of our senior leadership team on the sporting side to make sure that we're executing our vision. And then the third component is still a bit of that practitioner boots on the ground, which is where I started and will always be my love and something I'm not sure if I'll ever give up, but it is still a component of the job. Some director levels completely are removed from that, and mine isn't. And I think that's important to acknowledge. And that's a component of what I do. I think about it like kind of as a big puzzle, and it's a cool opportunity to be a small part of the puzzle pieces, but also have a hand in putting the puzzle together and deciding like, do we have all the pieces? What actually is this puzzle going to end up looking like? So being able to do all that. And I guess my why is like,
Hold on. Before you get to that. So of those three, like what is the one that is currently serving you the most? Like what do you prefer of those three parts of your role?
Not a cop answer.
I'll tell you why I asked that question, because I kind of have the same thing. Like I've got 3 roles in what I do now, right? I kind of run a company. I'm a CEO of a company. I educate coaches and I coach athletes.
Yeah.
Always continually asking myself, like, if I had to cut 2 of these things, which would be the 2 that I'm doing? Like I'm continually going through this existential piece, like what really serves me? Does coaching continue to serve me? And because if it doesn't, why am I doing it? Does the education serve me? So I wonder if you had those same sort of questions for yourself and And if you do, then how do you answer them?
Yeah, no, those are good questions, and I absolutely do, and those are questions that as we've been living through this role that I've had to think about and answer, and I think if I had to pick one, which I'm fortunate I don't, and but if I did, I think the long term right now, the long term kind of strategy planning piece, because especially this is a startup and there is no fabric, there is no history. Like it is a blank slate. And when you go into clubs that are established, you inherit a history for better or for worse. But I think when you do a startup, you have the ability to be involved with things that people may not do in their entire career. You know, you may not ever be part of building a training facility or a stadium or developing a staff, creating curriculum, like building out an organization. If you come into a startup, it's crazy, but you can be part of that. So that's really exciting right now because we're going at a very accelerated pace. We're not even a year and a half in, and we're already in the final stages with our project management team, architecture team of a new training facility. So things are moving very quickly, and our ownership group is very ambitious. And so it's really, really exciting to be part of that stuff. The flip side is sometimes that requires a little bit more patience. And I think as a former athlete and as a boots on the ground person, like I like that day to day actually doing something, not being on a computer all the time, not being on meetings all the time. But does that excite me in the same way that some of these long-term things do? Not the same way, but a way that's still fulfilling and still a way that I want to engage with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I end up in the same space.
Yeah.
Same place you are. Yeah, I like to do it all.
Yeah.
You get different pieces from different bits, so it's, yeah, I'm lucky and we're lucky that we don't have to choose, we can continue having dual or even try roles. All right. So that's what you do.
Yeah.
Why do you do it?
I like the puzzle. Like I like putting things together, moving them around, tinkering them, solving problems, and I like doing it with people. I think you can probably do that same puzzle problem, plan, execute, solve a set. Like you can do that probably as an engineer on a computer and on a lot of other fields, but I think the human component makes it so interesting. I like the competition component of it. Like by nature, I'm a very competitive person. So I like that put together and I love sport and being able to do it outside and in a sporting context for most days is just an incredible career, I think.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah. I look at my friends on computers all day inside and I'm like, I would go crazy. Like I could just go nuts.
No, it definitely beats a real job, doesn't it? I mean, it's hard. A lot of the times it is hard, but I mean, come on, I spend half the day out on the track and in the weight room and, traveling around the world and the country. It's pretty cool.
One of my best friends is a lawyer, and she said to me the other day, she's like, "When are you going to get a real job?" I was like, "This is my real job." Like,
Yeah.
I know it doesn't sound real to you, but I'm never getting a real job is the
No,
answer.
me either.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny, like one thing that you spoke about there was actually I wrote it down as one of the things I wanted to talk to you about because it's like, what's it like being part of this new franchise? Like it's a startup, as you've said now a few times. And and I actually wrote down like, how do you work? How does working in a blank slate differ from working in a system that has a history and therefore momentum behind it? Like right now, I'm assuming that there's no history, there's no momentum. It's all forward, it's all in front. What do you want to
Mhm.
build? Obviously, there's huge differences between those two things, but and some will be good differences and some will be challenging differences, and I'm sure probably some of those challenging differences even serve you. So just talk to us a little bit about you've worked now in both established franchises and a brand new franchise. What, I guess, challenges you the most in this operations within a blank slate? And what's the best part about it?
Yeah. I mean, we can start the best part. The best
Yeah.
part, it sounds cliche. Look, every day is so different and it is fast paced, and you constantly have to be critically analyzing everything. Like, you can't just hyper focus on one area. And I think I like that there are different challenges coming in all of the time. The flip side of that is you have to prioritize. You can't get everything done. There's no possible way. So it's this challenge of how can you stay present in the moment, do a really good job, execute those things, but not lose track of the long term. And simultaneously, how do you create enough time and space to plan for the long term when you're trying to figure out where are the soccer balls? Oh my gosh, nobody ordered soccer balls for the first day of training. Like, those are real things that happen.
Uh-huh.
So you hold, and I think that's the challenge in any sport, is the short term with the long term. And so you're doing that not only the day to day on the sporting side of things when you're talking about short term winning games, establishing yourself as a successful franchise, but also the long term of how do we not panic if the first few games are not going and we're not getting the results that we had hoped for.
Yeah, is there much, whether it's external or internal pressures on you guys to be successful quickly? Or they understand, all right, this is a startup. It's going to take some time here. It might not even be 3, 4, 5 years until we are an actual successful franchise. Is there kind of pressure from whether it's fans or ownership where you got to figure it out really quick?
No, I would say there is a healthy pressure, and if we feel a pressure, it's probably ones that we're imposing on ourselves because we're competitive and we're a competitive group. We have like clearly defined success metrics from our ownership group. We met ours last year. Last year was to make the playoffs, and we made the playoffs this year. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it publicly, but it's to host a home playoff game. So that's finishing top 4. And so I think those are very realistic expectations of success. Nobody is saying, hey, we want you to throw a trophy in the air year 2. Do we all want that? Yes. Do we all strive to want to do that? Yes. But do we also want to do it the right way and build something that is sustainable? Absolutely. And I think we have a very unique ownership, and that they understand that and they're willing to support that. But they also have done a great job of making their expectations very clear. And I think this is actually my second startup. So in MLS, I did the startup as well, but they were in the lower division and then got promoted. So it was a little bit different. There at least was some infrastructure, some carryover. But I think that was one of the biggest differences that I noticed with that, was just that clarity of expectation. So during a startup or during expansion, there are so many things that are moving. And I think if expectations are also a moving target, it is really hard to hit that and to hit the priority and to hit that focus. But this time, this project, the expectations have been so clear. So when you're in a situation where you have to decide and you have to prioritize things or decisions or resources, it has been much easier to do that because you say, hey, this is the priority. How do we get here? This is the expectation. And then you have the autonomy to do that however you want. But those kind of North Stars are crystal clear in this project.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, just getting back there. How are the players with this? Like, is there an added sense of excitement from the playing staff as well? Because this is a brand new thing. And do they feel like, all right, there's some pressure on us now to create this culture that hasn't existed before? And there's almost an added sense of responsibility for them as well.
Yeah, I think they do feel that. I think part of the recruitment process for staff and for players, but especially for players, was making sure that first of all, I don't know how our recruiting staff did it, because at the time we had no training facility, we had no head coach, we had nothing. And so they were basically recruiting based off an idea, which is just fascinating that you can convince people to come to a place. But I think that was intentional with the recruitment of players, was to say, hey, we are not going to have these things in place. This is kind of the plan for it. But do you want to be part of making that, of building of being part of the process, and making sure that you had people, again, staff or players, who wanted to do that and felt they would be successful in an environment like that versus in one that's already been established and is highly regimented and structured. Like, it's not good or bad. It's a different type of person and it's a different type of experience. And we found some staff and some players who really, really struggled with some of the ambiguity or that lack of structure, or, that lack of, picture perfect training facility, little things like that. So really making sure you have the right person who wants to be part of that process, because then for them, especially the players, it's not just what's happening on the field, but it's also what's happening off the field in building that culture, in kind of setting that kind of fabric of the sporting side of how we want to operate, how we want to engage in the community, how we want to be known. And they do feel that. They do also want that, but it certainly is top of mind, in addition to the football performance.
Are you guys still operating out of a temporary facility right now?
No, so we were never out of a temporary. It's not our permanent facility, but we'll be here hopefully 3 years. So this is year 2 of 3. We're at a local university, so we have a kind of shared facility. We have private components of them, and then we have a shared field space. So it is public-private shared, but it's not our own. But the flip side is you get to be part of making our own, permanent training facility, which again is already in the process. And I think as long as people can see progress, then there's that excitement and that willingness to stick with the process. There have been other clubs where either funding has fallen through or they haven't been able to move as quickly as they initially thought they would. Then I think you can get some friction because people kind of start to spiral and say, yeah, we're never getting out of this setting. And then you lose folks along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I maybe 3 years ago, I was in the UK and I was kind of doing a tour of a few of the Premiership clubs, and I went in and spent a day with Brentford. And Brentford at the time, like Brentford are known still today as a really, really well-run football team, like really well from top to bottom. They do a great job with recruiting. They have, they recruit great players, a really, really forward-thinking manager, really good support staff. They're just a well-run club. But at the time, they did not really have a place to train. They were kind of in between places. So they had all of these porta cabins, essentially, like all these tiny little porta cabins with have to walk in between them, right? Each one was, I don't know, maybe 16 feet by 30 feet or something, right? And then there'd be a gym, and then the gym would have to be 3 or 4 of these cabins, and the manager's office was a cabin. It was really interesting, but you could tell that like it almost brought all the players together and the staff together. That's all right. We're part of something here. We're part of, like, this is really cool. We're building something, and we can see over there, right across the field, that this incredible facility is being built. So you see, as you said, they could understand the process and they can see it actually happening. And I felt like because of this, it even brought them all together more, and it probably led to even greater success than they would have if they didn't have that. I feel like sometimes, especially now, we get, trying to keep up with the Joneses, and we build these, better, bigger, more beautiful, more shiny objects that we kind of lose sight of sometimes the power of just, getting the work done in this really kind of almost primitive environment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And we talk about that a lot. And one of my favorite memories from MLS was the first year when we were doing exactly that. And we were actually offsite at an indoor facility that was connected to, and this is in Minnesota, so it was connected to a hockey rink. And we were in a high school girls' locker room changing. And then at the end of training, we were sitting down eating Panera on the ground in the women's hockey locker room. One of the players opened up the locker and it had the toolbox full of tampons, and everyone's like, what are those? But that was one of the foundational memories. And like, everybody was slinging bags. Everybody was trying to play, players, staff, everyone was trying to figure out how to make it work and was really proud to be part of making it work and not just having something handed to them. And that's one of the big things like we talk about now as a staff and with the players is like, we have an ownership group that is very supportive. They're excellent. They are outstanding. But how do we still build a culture where people want to work hard, where they take ownership, where they're appreciative of things, where they're bought into a process? Like money doesn't fix everything. And we need to be really intentional about how we're approaching that. And it's really hard. Like it's really hard because you want to be competitive, you want to be attractive if you're talking about recruiting, but you want the right people there. And if you want the right people who are willing to do the hard work, maybe they'll see some of the value in that process and in that grit a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny how those types of memories are, they just stay with us for so long. I think back to when I first started as an S&C coach, maybe late 90s with my buddy and colleague, Dr. Matt Jordan. And our first office in the Olympic Oval at the University of Calgary was a broom closet.
Yeah.
It was a broom closet. It was a closet that they took all of the brooms and the cleaning supplies out of, and we put two little desks, and there was something like this together, on these two little desks. And that was our office for like 4 or 5 years, It was, yeah, but those are great memories. Yeah, I know, those memories will stay with me until, probably until the day I die. So it's like, I think there's something to be said about those challenging circumstances for sure.
Yeah. Well, you'll be happy to know that our current department office, like I don't have an office. We have a shared bullpen office. It was an overflow shower. So we put up like plywood boxes around the shower heads right now, and we call it our shoffice. I'll send you a picture. On Tuesday when we're back in there. But it's the shoffice, and it's all tile. It's all tile. It has the little pillars. So we tried to hide the moldy shower heads, but like that's real life. We needed a space we could fit into, and we love it. I mean, I love it. I hope they love it too. But it's become like our thing. So those are the best.
It's going to be sad when you move out of that and move into this big shiny object. That part of you will be sad about that for sure.
For sure. I'm taking the plywood that has gone around to create the pillars because we have things tacked up on that and written onto that. And that's kind of become our whiteboard, but it's kind of a little bit of like a time capsule too. So we'll definitely take those.
Amazing. Love it. So you've had multiple roles. You're a director now. What is a director anyway? Like what is a director? What does that mean? You direct things.
I guess, but I think it's really more of a translator of understanding from, our sporting director who is linked into our ownership group. Like, what is the big picture, I don't want to say directive. What is the big picture? And then how do we execute that at whatever level we're at? So it's kind of that translator piece coming down and then ultimately making sure that our group is functioning together. Are we talking together? Do we have visibility into what's going on? How are we making decisions? How are those decisions affecting each other? So like when I hear the word director, I think of almost like somebody standing up being like, you do this, you do this, you do this. Like that's not what I do like at all.
You say our group. Who are you actually referring to when you say our group? Like you
talking
about the health and performance team? Or are you talking about the other quote unquote directors?
Yeah, we kind of are two separate groups. So one is our health and performance team. So that's, athletic training, physical therapy, dietitian, mental performance, strength and conditioning, sports science, massage therapy, that group of it. There's eight folks who are in that department right now. And then we have our senior leadership group. So there's 4 of us who are head coach, myself, there's 5 of us, our head of global scouting and recruiting, director of football ops, and our director of data and analytics. So anyone who can lead the department on the sporting side, we have that group, and that's where our sporting director kind of brings us together on that level. So kind of a stepwise progression of folks in roles, making sure ultimately, like it always comes back to communication, right? Like it's just making sure the right people have the right information at the right time and can make decisions effectively or to the best of their ability for what they need to execute.
Is that kind of the skill or the ability that you have that you feel has served you moving from like a practitioner into a director? Obviously, you're a really good communicator. So I feel like, going into a position where maybe you didn't have experience before, managing a group of people as well as operating within this director team and, all these multiple different roles at multiple scales that you've got. Many people are kind of challenged by that because it is a new thing, and some fail at it and some are okay at it. And I feel like the ones that do pretty well at it are the ones that, as you say, they're just really good communicators, and they see that as being kind of the one skill that's required to do all of these things. Or is there something else that you feel that you've got that lends you to being a good director as well, or is that kind of it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm always trying to get better at the communication piece because everyone is different and everyone requires different communication. And that's been a big learning point for me, especially recently. Like we talked a little bit about communication with the players and maybe how we communicate or how we prefer to communicate is not how they're going to be able to best receive that information. So like different learning styles, different communication styles. I think it's more of that willingness to be adaptable, still kind of know what your bottom line is, what your non-negotiables are, but have that adaptability. And then in sport, in general, I think there's a lack of organization because of that time crunch people, I think, feel. I think that's been more of what has helped me be successful is to be able to organize and then be able to articulate ideas because they are thought out and organized. And like, yeah, I can give, the GM a one sheeter that explains this in very simple, organized terms, and they can understand it. And that's the other piece is like the organization and appropriate communication. Like you don't want to overwhelm whoever you're talking to. You want to be able to give them the appropriate level of communication. And like my younger me was probably just more excited to talk about stuff. And I'm like, yeah, let's talk about the science behind this. It's like, the GM doesn't care. Like you lost him. Like, but it's cool to me. So being able to acknowledge, hey, like let's make this really simple. Let's figure out what they care about and what they actually want to know and just execute that in a way that is super simple, crystal clear. And then I think just like generally being a reasonable person to be around during the day. Like you want to be around people that are enjoyable to be around. Like sometimes the challenging people are fun too in different ways, but especially when you're spending so much time around folks, like good energy, positive attitude, accountable, being able to, have direct conversations with a ability to emotionally regulate and be able to say things in like a factual but helpful way is also something that I think has been different for me versus some other, colleagues and folks I've been around who are potentially like less able to emotionally regulate. And so, situations become very heated very fast where they don't, at least my assessment, like necessarily need to be. There isn't an organization and, what they're doing. Like those things, I think over time, people can drain people more than help them.
I think, like soccer for me is so unique in this, and maybe it's a little bit different in the US. Like if you're not a good communicator, you've got no shot. Because if you look at your typical team of players, and you've got a team of 22 or 24 or 25 or whatever, often they're from 15 different countries.
Yeah.
Like with those 15 different sets of backgrounds and biases and experiences from all over the world, and you've got to understand what that means and what that means that not only how to communicate with them, but how it changes the job and changes what you expect of each of them. So I feel like that, I don't know what the experience is like in America. I know it's a little bit less diverse than that, becoming more and more diverse, especially in the MLS. Maybe in the NWSL, it's a little bit different, but I'm sure you've still got four or five different countries and people from countries that you're dealing with. It's how do you, I guess, specifically work within that type of ecosystem? Or is it just
Yeah.
being, as you said, just understanding, I've just got to be adaptable and I've got to learn how to communicate well?
Yeah. I think it always comes back to adaptability, but not putting your value system on somebody else. And I think that was a big learning coming out of school. You're all hot and you're like, evidence based practice. I know it's going to work. Like, I got the evidence right here. All right. And then you have a player from South America, like a national team player from South America, who's like, the weight room is going to kill me. I just need massages every day. And you're like, okay, clearly I'm not going to jam this article down his throat, but like, how can we talk about that? How can we find a common ground? Like, let's just find a common ground first. Like, cool, all right, we're talking about your kid because that's exciting and that's what you want to talk about. And then slowly you have those conversations and like learn more about it. And somebody they really trusted at the beginning of their career, that was where this idea that they were going to die in the weight room came from. And that's how massage wrapped in. But like, if you come in hard, you better be prepared for them to clam up. And sometimes you make a decision like you're going to come in hard and that's okay, but you have to be prepared for that recoil versus saying, hey, like, this is a relationship. This is going to be a long-term relationship. This player is going to be here for 4 years. We need to start understanding each other. We need to start understanding our value systems, and then you can make progress from there. But I think it's very rare, especially an elite level athlete, because most are pretty strong in their convictions. It's very rare that they're going to walk in and automatically trust you. Like, that's not something I've really experienced.
Yeah,
I've
you're just the latest in a whole list of people that they've seen, right? And often we just go into this, I'm me. You got to listen to me, and you're just the latest person, and it's going to take time for them to, all right, this person's okay, and I'll start listening to them.
Yeah. And they care about me and they have my best interest. And that's something I've noticed, like, when you start to change from solely a practitioner to practitioner having a role in leadership, and you get closer to the people who are ultimately making decisions about their time on the field and their time within the organization, is how you're perceived by the players based off of your proximity to those decision makers is different than if you're solely a practitioner and you don't have proximity to those decision makers. So it takes even more time. It takes them seeing even more that ultimately you do care about them. You care about their health and well-being. You care about their performance. You care about their families. You care about how they are on and off the field. And that's been one of the biggest differences in the NWSL, is just that life off of the field is talked about a lot more. And I think a lot more weight is put onto that than in MLS, where there was kind of that more traditional, like, I'm an athlete, I got my pro sport thing. In the NWSL, it's, hey, I am a professional footballer, but I'm also really passionate about this cause. I want to be invested in my community. I'm also a partner. I'm also a dog mom or a human mom. Like, there are many different facets that are very, very, very important to them. And if they don't feel cared for and supported in all of those, football is just one of them.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to take a left turn here.
Cool. Go for it.
This is something that's frustrated me this year, and it's always something that I'm very interested in this. How do you personally now as a director, and prior to that as a more of a practitioner, I don't say just a practitioner, but a practitioner, not a director, navigate the tension between the necessity of short-term performance and long-term health? And this is it's front of mind for me because of some very well-known cases right now of managers doing a really bad job of this. The
Hmm.
manager of my team, who's supposedly the greatest manager in history, has done a very bad job of this. The Tottenham Hotspur manager has done a really bad job of this. You know, when you've got a player who's coming back from a 6-week hamstring tear, for example, and has had 2 practices, and you decide to start him. And then guess what guess what happens? 22 minutes into the first half, he tears a hamstring again. Yeah, oh.
Yeah.
It's
Surprise.
a big surprise, right? We see
Yeah.
this all the time where managers kind of they see, oh, the player's ready to he's back at practice, so he's ready to play. But he's
Yeah.
not, you know, and there's obviously a conversation between the performance and health director, the medical director, the doctor, and the manager, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's the manager's choice or the head coach's choice. It's their determination whether they play or not, because they're focused on short-term performance. Peaking by Saturday. We have to win on Saturday. And if it goes down, it goes down. That's okay. It's just the luck of the game. You know, it's just bad luck, as we've generally put it down to in this sport. So how do you, as a director now, sitting at the same level-ish with the manager, the head coach, how do you navigate those conversations with this person now? And how did you deal with it when you were a practitioner? And how much did it frustrate you?
Yeah, those are good questions. And it is interesting to see the game change, like we talked about earlier, in terms of like physical demands. And I think we're seeing, and maybe I just pay more attention to it, but I feel like the re-injury rate during matches in the first half is just astronomically higher. But to answer your question, it starts with ownership, and it starts with the directive that they're providing. If they are providing, if not, then whoever is providing that directive, it starts with them, because inherently there are two conflicting stages that clubs are going to be in. Exactly that: short-term results, long-term success and health. So if the leadership group or the ownership, whoever is setting that, wants to create an environment of competition and conflict, they can absolutely do that. They can absolutely do that by pressuring the coach, by telling him or her, you need to win, your job is on the line. We gave you a 1-year deal that has a kicker if you get X percentage, winning, blah, blah, blah. Like, they can inherently create that in the environment, or they can do the opposite and say, like, we believe in this, we know what this is going to take, here are some goals. Like, how much of the pressure cooker do they want to set the environment to be? Then that sets the stage. Then on the day to day, like, those are conversations, and the way I approach them is an assessment of risk. And I'll tell our head coach, and because it always is, ultimately it's your choice. It is your choice. Here is what I think, based off of these facts, the level of risk is. Then we'll go through kind of a thought exercise of, okay, if it goes exactly how we want it to go, great. This person plays 65 minutes or so, because that's what you're saying would be ideal for them in the scenario and the team. Great. They do it. They feel good. Life is good. We come out. Okay. Worst case scenario, they blow their hamstring out again. You have to use a sub in the first half, and they're out for 8 weeks. How do you feel about that outcome? Oh no, that's terrible. That would be really terrible. Okay, then you probably don't want to assume that level of risk. But like, it is your choice, but you should think through the outcomes before you make an emotional decision based off of wanting to win. And I think that's where I can be helpful, is trying to take that emotional piece out of it before you get in very emotional situations like games that are fueled by emotion and passion and competition and winning. So, like, I have a very good relationship with our coach. He's very reasonable. But he also is a head coach, right? And he also loves to win like we do. But if you can talk about it less in terms of, I think they need to play 60 minutes and this is why, and, tissue health and whatever, like, if you can talk about it in terms of potential outcomes for him and for the team, then, like, in my experience, like, they usually come to a reasonable conclusion. Not always, but usually, and then you can help them get there. But it's just like that assessment of risk, and are you okay with, each level of outcome. And if you're not, take that out of your decision making. It's not an option anymore.
I mean, it's seemingly so simple, isn't
Right. Right.
it? But it's at some of the biggest clubs in the world, it's not happening. I mean, I've got to assume the conversations are happening,
Right.
but the ignorance of it, they're just totally ignoring these risks and these conversations about the risk. I don't get it. I understand that, yeah, there's a short-term performance benefit here, but it's also a long-term performance benefit because if you do play this player too early, and some of the best managers on the planet, quote unquote, have done that, then as you said, and as we've said, like 6 to 8 weeks out again, it's I mean I'm just emotional about this because it blew up my team's year. We're not winning our fifth straight championship. We're going to be coming third instead. So it's anyways, but I feel like it's really fascinating and for me, again, it just comes down to the importance of communication and being able to have these conversations, sometimes really hard conversations with the people that are the decision makers here. And in some cases, those are really hard, depending on the personality of the person that you're having those conversations with. So I'm glad that you don't seem to have that problem when you've got a coach or a manager that actually listens to you. So well done.
Yeah, no, but I think it's driven by ownership because again, like we, I think, feel an appropriate level of stress and pressure. And if we feel more, I guarantee that self-driven, like there is an expectation to win, like we talked about. But I wonder was, some of those other clubs that you've been talking about, like, do those coaches feel like, okay, I have 8 weeks or I am on the chopping block and I do need to play this player because if I don't get a result tonight, I'm getting fired. You see that in the NWSL, but it is much more rare. I mean, in Europe, it's like every time, after the end of every weekend, it's like somebody's getting fired. So like their time scale is very different. And so even asking them to consider an 8-week hamstring injury may not be something they're able to process. And that's a whole different problem, but I think that is a reality for a lot of them. And I think that would be a terribly difficult position as a performance director to be in, because then, where do you stand also? Like, are you also on the chopping block? Then maybe your decision is self-serving and you're saying, great, yeah, play him, no problem. Or is it more that, you're more of a traditional club employee where they're like, great, you're on a 3-year deal, you're going to be here. Like then you're, inherently your decision making is probably going to be a little bit different. So it kind of comes back to that system.
Yeah, that tension. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, let's wrap it up. I mean, we've been here for an hour. Let's we're doing this in support of the ALTIS Speed Summit coming up in June. Education, obviously. So what does education look like to you now? Mid-career-ish, you kind of know a certain amount of things. Your role has changed a little bit over the course of time, so you have to learn some new things. What is your process of learning like now as you're coming through this part of your career and your life?
Yeah, I think I'm at the point where I just like have so many questions. So I'm doing a PhD now because I have a clinical doctorate, and so I just was like, all right, the first of all, that was a long time ago, and a lot of things have changed. And switching, I think, from MLS to the NWSL, I was like, man, I just have so many questions. And then you hop in the literature, and there are no answers, especially for female athletes. So being able to do something grounded in science is really important to me, and in facts is really important to me. So that's like one formal component that I think will always be embedded. But really the conversations with colleagues too is really important, because like you can read from a book, you can do your research, you can do those things, but the applied part is, I think, what makes people different. So making sure that you have a network and are being intentional about how you engage with that network, to continue to learn and grow. And then like really, I like a formal plan. Like I'd like to be able to say like, yes, I'm going to go to this conference and I need to learn more about this. And just being like super curious and listening to people and learning from people outside of, your sport or your profession or your domain. Like, there's so much more out there, and like you can get so siloed in one thought. And I think that's one of the risks that I see, one of the potential unintended consequences, especially in the way that football staffs are being structured, is like this highly like specialist based departments where you come in high performance and it's like specialist, but people can't really talk to each other because there is no generalist, no common thread throughout. So that's what I really am being more intentional about, is like stepping outside of my soccer community, stepping outside of my, performance sports med community, and it's been like, all right, what else is out there? Because I know like this much and like there's so much more.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
How do you do a PhD? Like, you've got 3 jobs. And I'm going to do a PhD. Yeah, okay. How did that sound like a good idea to you? And then how do you have time to do it? And what is it? Like, what are you studying?
Yeah, it didn't sound like a good idea. It still doesn't sound like a good idea when you say it out loud.
It sounds like a terrible idea.
It is. But I actually know the folks. So some of my former colleagues in MLS went through the same program. And I know the advisor group, the expectations, and one of my colleagues, it took him 6 years and 2 kids and 2 clubs, and he got it done. And like, for me, I know I'm gonna go through the process. It's whether I formalize it or not. And I was like, all right, like, let's just try it and see. And they're super supportive, really fun, challenging. But it's more of a person-led, like, if I tell them, hey, it's preseason and I'm not going to do anything for the next 8 weeks, like, let's check in, they're like, okay, great. If I tell them, hey, I need a kick in the butt because I'm just being lazy, they're like, great, set a meeting in 2 weeks. So it feels achievable for where I'm at in my career, versus doing like a full-time embedded wet lab. Like, that sounds really horrible to me. So but I'm looking at the construct of fatigue. And one of the things that I've noticed going from men's sport into women's is just that subjective report of fatigue is different. And then anecdotally, they'll say a lot like, oh, I don't think I'm physically fatigued, but I'm mentally fatigued. So even things like, our wellness questionnaires that everybody's asking, like, if we put fatigue down, like, what does that actually mean? How are players answering it? How are they interpreting it? Do we need to split that out into, an assessment of physical fatigue versus an assessment of cognitive fatigue? If we say cognitive fatigue versus mental fatigue, like, what does that mean? So starting to understand from the player's seat what those questions actually mean and what those tools actually are. So that's my first one, kind of the first part of the project, and then looping it actually into physical performance. So hopefully 2 separate layers of after that. So one is more, looping it into the physiology of what's happening, changing inside the body, biomarkers of, inflammation, recovery, things like that. Do they correlate with this new outcome measure or this new question or way of asking questions? And then ultimately, how does that link into physical performance? And can we maybe, if somebody is answering something on a survey, if we have the right question, worded in the right way, interpreted in the right way, can that give us a clue into how they're going to perform? So
health as well, or just on the performance end?
Right now we're just looking on the performance end of things, but as you know, with PhD work, it goes many different ways. And I think there will be a branch out that starts to go into the injury side of things, and especially the recovery during an injury process side of things. So maybe that's like a second PhD or a postdoc or something. I don't know.
I look forward to reading that dissertation in about 6 or 7 years.
Yep, me too.
Stacey, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to get to know you a little bit, and we'll see you in a few weeks in Chicago.
Perfect. Likewise. We'll see you there.
That's it for today's episode. A big thank you once again to Stacey Hardin for sharing her expertise and her experiences with us. As I said, I really enjoyed that conversation. Great to get to know Stacey a little bit and hear some things about things that I didn't know anything about. So that was really cool. Especially interesting to me was how she's operating within this brand new startup thing, right? This blank slate of a brand new franchise in NWSL. So I thought that was pretty cool. If you're attending the ALTIS Speed Summit, please, and if you haven't bought your ticket yet, altis.world. Thanks again to our sponsors, 3x4 Genetics, Stat Sports, 1080 Sprint, Team Builder, and Output Sports for making this event, as well as this podcast, possible. Until next time, stay curious, keep pushing the boundaries of performance and health. See you next time. Thanks for being here.